Have you ever found yourself, I don't know, halfway through a bag of chips you never even meant to open? Or maybe you said yes to a favor you absolutely did not have time for? We've all been there, right? We have that moment where we just stop and think, wait, why did I just do that? It's this feeling that we're not always in the driver's seat of our own lives. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the hidden forces, the psychological and biological scripts that are quietly running the show every single day. And it all really boils down to this one big question. I mean, our brains are capable of these incredible things, landing rovers on other planets. And yet that same brain can convince us that checking our phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes is a totally reasonable thing to do. So what is going on in there? Why does it feel like our own mind is working against us sometimes? Let's dive in. All right, the first hidden force we need to talk about is something that runs about half of our entire waking life. It's our brain's autopilot. This is the immense and honestly often underestimated power of habit. It's the silent engine that gets us through the day without us having to consciously sweat every single tiny detail. And this is not some new age idea. The pioneering psychologist William James was talking about this over a century ago, and it's still so relevant. He basically understood that we can either spend our lives fighting against our own brains, or we can learn to make our wiring work for us. He saw that the real key to a good life was getting a handle on our brain's automatic tendencies. James had a word for this: automatism. Now, think about your morning. You brush your teeth, you drive to work, you tie your shoes. These are actually really complex actions, but you do them perfectly without dedicating any real brain power to them. That's your brain handing over the controls to your habits, which frees up your conscious mind for bigger, more important problems. It's an incredible efficiency hack built right into us. And this really lays out what's at stake. On the left, you've got a life where every little decision is a battle. I mean, can you imagine having to consciously decide which sock to put on first every single morning? It sounds exhausting, right? That is the burden of choice. But on the right, you have the freedom of habit, where all those useful actions are so ingrained, they just happen. This shows you exactly how our habits can be our best friends, freeing up our minds, or our worst enemies, trapping us in a cycle of indecision. Okay, so we've looked inside our own programming. Now let's turn our attention outward to all those invisible social triggers that are floating around us all the time. These are the subtle psychological levers that other people can use, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not, to influence what we do. One of the most powerful of these is something the psychologist Robert Cialdini calls the reciprocity rule. It's this fundamental social contract that's basically baked into humanity. If someone does something for you, you feel this deep internal obligation to do something for them in return. It's great for trust and cooperation, but boy, it can also be exploited. Just think about this for a second. That free coffee from your coworker, it wasn't just a nice gesture. On a subconscious level, it created this tiny, unspoken debt in your mind. The rule of reciprocity just kicks right in, and suddenly saying no to their much, much bigger request feels almost impossible. You feel this powerful pull to repay the favor, even if the trade is totally unequal. It's a subtle force, but it is so potent. And here's another huge psychological trigger: the scarcity principle. We humans, for whatever reason, just put a higher value on things that are hard to get. The moment an opportunity starts to seem less available, we feel like we're losing a freedom, and our gut reaction is to want that thing even more than we did before. And you see this everywhere. I mean, this is a perfect storm of scarcity tactics. Last chance, limited time only. These phrases aren't just giving you information. They're psychological triggers. They're designed to completely bypass your rational brain by creating this intense sense of urgency and a fear of missing out. They're pressuring you to act now before you have time to think it through. So, we've covered our internal habits and the external social pressures, but there's a third, critical force we absolutely have to talk about: our own biology. Specifically, the really profound way that stress can hijack our physical and mental state and totally change how we think and how we behave. The classic model for this is called the general adaptation syndrome, developed by a researcher named Hans Selye. He discovers that the body has this really consistent and predictable way of responding to any kind of long-term stress, whether that's a crazy deadline at work or an actual physical threat. You can kind of think of it as the body's three-act play for dealing with pressure. And it always unfolds in these three stages. First, you have alarm. This is that initial shock, right? The classic fight or flight response. Then comes resistance. If the stress keeps going, your body rallies all its resources to cope, and you start operating at this really high level of alert. But here's the thing, that can't last forever. If the source of the stress isn't removed, you eventually hit the final stage, exhaustion.
And this is what that exhaustion phase can look like. It's a state where your body's resources are just gone. They're completely drained. Your physical energy, your psychological energy reserves, they're all tapped out. And that leaves you vulnerable to getting sick, to burnout, and to making really poor decisions. Chronic stress literally wears your body and your mind down, making you a passenger to your own biology. So, after exploring our habits, social triggers, and biological responses, it might feel like we're just puppets on a string. But this final part is all about flipping that script. It's about how understanding these forces is actually the key to taking back the controls and becoming the architect of your own choices.
The most crucial takeaway here is this: awareness is your superpower. You can't fight an enemy you can't see. The moment you recognize your autopilot kicking in, or you feel a social trigger being pulled, or you notice that stress is draining your battery, you give yourself a choice. You can interrupt that automatic script and decide to do something different. So here are some actionable strategies you can use. First, filter your thoughts. Not every impulse needs to be followed. Know what you actually control and what you don't. Give yourself time to think. You can resist that pressure of scarcity. Try to stop making those snap decisions, especially when you feel stressed or pressured. And finally, work on aligning your actions with what's truly important to you, not just with some automatic script or what other people expect. And that brings us right back to where we started, with William James. Knowing about all these hidden forces isn't just some interesting psychological trivia. It's a practical toolkit. So the real question now is, how are you going to use this knowledge? How are you going to start training your habits, recognizing those social triggers, and managing your stress to finally turn your nervous system from an enemy